Hey guys, Shunji here, and today I'm going to be talking about the monk job. This guide will cover common monk terms, single target rotations, AoE rotations, cross-class abilities, offensive cooldowns, defensive cooldowns, and stat prioritization. Man, that's a lot to talk about, so let's jump right into it. So, the terms you will need to know when playing the monk class are as follows. Grease Lightning, which increases damage by 9% and attack speed by 5%. Grease Lightning 2, which increases damage by 18% and attack speed by 10%. Grease Lightning 3, which increases damage by 27% and attack speed by 15%. You also have 3 forms that each skill can use, as well as which form each skill activates. The order that your forms will always go in are Raptor, Corel, and Opa Opa. Then it will repeat. Alright, so there are 2 single target rotations you're going to need to memorize in order to get the most DPS out of your monk. Now, it doesn't matter if you start with rotation 1 or rotation 2, you will always apply Touch of Death at the start of the fight. The first rotation follows this combo. Do all of your buffs, Death Touch, Perfect Balance, Snap Punch, Demolish, Twin Snakes, and then Snap Punch. This rotation is used to get max Grease Lightning stacks very quickly, your own Twin Snakes buff up, and it is also the most efficient way to have all of your dots applied to a single target in the shortest amount of time, so that you can begin your standard monk rotation. Something to note though, the skill that makes this rotation work is Perfect Balance, which is on a 3-minute cooldown timer. That being said, you will need to make sure that when using this rotation, you will not need to use Perfect Balance again within the next 3 minutes, or you could potentially cause your party to wipe due to the lack of DPS, or not have it available if you mess up on your Grease Lightning stacks, and they fall off for some reason. Now, when it comes to the second rotation, this rotation you'll be using every single fight, regardless of whether or not you started with rotation 1. This second rotation is your standard rotation that consists of a long strand of abilities used to maximize your DPS. However, there are a few things that you need to be aware of about this rotation. The first being that this rotation assumes that you will be using each skill listed from the side that deals the most damage, whether it's the flank or the rear. Also, I understand that sometimes using these skills on moving targets can be very difficult, especially when there are a lot of AoEs forcing you to move around, but just do your best and everything should be alright. Secondly, if you have the Scholar skill speed buff on you while you perform your standard rotation, it will more than likely throw off your timing. So some things to keep in mind if this has happened to you. If your Dragon debuff has a few seconds left, but you're starting on your Bootshine rotation, use Dragon Kick instead, even if Dragon Kick has not fully worn off yet. The reason for this is because the 10% blunt resistant debuff is a lot more important and increases your DPS by a lot more than if you would have completed your Bootshine rotation without the Dragon Kick debuff. Also, you need to be aware of how much time is remaining on Demolish, since the increased attack speed from the Scholar may cause it to still be up by the time you reach it in your rotation. So keep this tip in mind. If Demolish has 4 seconds or more left on it when you reach it in your rotation, just reapply Demolish on your next combo. However, if it has 3 seconds or less at this point, simply override Demolish and reapply it in this combo. Alright, so for the second rotation, this will be considered your standard rotation. Start off the fight with Touch of Death unless you started the fight with the first rotation. Directly after Touch of Death, use Bootshine, Twin Snakes, Demolish, Dragon Kick, True Strike, and then Snap Punch. Now, the reason you start off the fight with Bootshine and not Dragon Kick is because Bootshine's potency of 150 is not based on positioning, whereas to get the same potency for Dragon Kick, you would have to be on the enemy's flank. It's just a lot easier to run into the fight and hit Bootshine than it would be to run in, position yourself, and hope that you're on the enemy's flank. However, on the next rotation, regardless if you are on their flank or not, Dragon Kick will be used to apply the negative 10% blunt resistance to the target. You also apply Demolish as soon as possible so you can get that extra damage ticking while you build Grease Lightning stacks. Then you can reapply all the dots as needed from here on. Then you'll want to use Bootshine, Twin Snakes, Snap Punch, Dragon Kick, True Strike, Demolish. Now that you have Opa Opa bonus and the Dragon Kick debuff on the target, Bootshine's 100% crit chance from behind the target will hit a lot harder than it would have without setting up all of your buffs and debuffs this way. To make sure you are not using Demolish while it's still active on the target, you use Snap Punch here, and then reapply Demolish on the next combo. Now, due to the small amount of time Dragon Kick debuff is on the target and Twin Snake's buff is on you, you will need to alternate between Dragon Kicks and Bootshines, as well as Twin Snakes and True Strikes. Also, every third rotation, you will need to reapply Demolish. This way, you are not clipping any of the buffs or debuffs while fighting, which will net you the most DPS overall. Sometimes this can get pretty complicated because of your other dot, Touch of Death, but just remember to keep an eye on your current buffs to see if you need Twin Snakes your next rotation or True Strike. Now, during all of these rotations, whether it's your Perfect Balance rotation or your Standard rotation, you will have a few skills that are not on the global cooldown, meaning they can be woven in between your skills. The first one is Steel Peak. Steel Peak is an instant cast ability that hits for 150 potency and stuns the target for 4 seconds. This has a 40-second cooldown and should be used every time it's available, unless the target needed to be stunned for some other reason, such as Ifrit's fight or turn 2 of the Biting Cold Bahamut. The next skill is Howling Fist. Similarly to Steel Peak, this skill is an instant cast ability which hits for 170 potency to all enemies in a straight line. Now this is great to add to your AoE rotation, which I will discuss in a moment, but it can also be used to increase your burst damage by weaving it into your rotations. This ability has a long cooldown of 60 seconds, so make sure you will not need to use its burst in the coming minute. Alright, now for the AoE rotations. There are a few options you can do. The first is Armor the Destroyer, Twin Snakes, then Rockbreaker. This rotation is great for doing the most AoE damage possible, but will absolutely drain your TP extremely fast when doing so. So be very careful not to use it too many times in a row, or you may find yourself unable to use any skills while waiting for your TP to regenerate. The next one is a little less TP destroying, but will still drain it if you're not careful. It goes like this: Dragon Kick or Boot Shine, Twin Snakes, Rockbreaker. This one is extremely good if you're fighting a high health enemy who has a couple adds with much lower health. This rotation will allow you to still keep the debuff up on the main target, the high health enemy, and be able to hit his adds at the same time without having to manually switch targets. Though, if the adds do need to be focused down quicker, you may want to just use the first rotation or switch to a single target rotation to finish them off. As I stated before, don't forget that you can weave in Howling Fist into either one of these rotations to increase the effectiveness of your AoEs. The next thing we want to talk about is cross-class abilities. There are quite a few of these, however, not all of them are useful for the Monk. Now, the two classes the Monk draws their cross-class abilities from are the Lancer and the Marauder. Now, under the Lancer tab, you will notice the first ability is Feint. This skill has a potency of 120 and also adds a 20% slow to the target. Since the Monk's rotation is so tightly tuned, this skill really has no place in it. However, if a slow is needed for some reason in your group, feel free to pick this up, but it is not mandatory to have. The next skill is Keen Flurry. This increases your parry rate by 40% for 20 seconds. It's not great, and I don't really suggest picking it up unless you want it for increased survivability in solo content. Next up is Impulse Drive, which delivers an attack potency of 100. Unless you're behind the target, then it deals 180 attack potency. There is some debate on whether this skill is worth getting, and I find that in some cases it can be really nice for sustained 180 potency attack back to back, but in all honesty, it's not something I find to be an essential part of the Monk arsenal. Though, if you feel it helps you in your rotation, then by all means, I suggest you pick it up and give it a go. The next two skills are mandatory for all Monks to have no matter what other cross-class abilities you pick up. The first one is Invigorate. This skill instantly restores 400 TP on a 2-minute cooldown. This skill is beyond amazing for those bosses that take a long time to kill or when you need to AoE often. This skill will save you from having no TP at all. I always use this skill once my TP drops to 600 so that by the time my TP is getting low again, Invigorate will be off the cooldown. The next mandatory skill is Blood for Blood. Though it was nerfed in patch 2.1, it is still one of the best offensive cooldowns in the game when it comes to cross-class abilities. Blood for Blood increases the damage dealt by 10%, but when you use it, it also will increase the damage done to you by 25%. So if you're fighting a boss that has unavoidable damage, such as Titan Stomps, be very careful using the skill, or it could cause you to take too much damage and you will die. The final mandatory skill comes from the Marauder, Mercy Stroke. This skill is an instant cast ability that does not sit on the global cooldown and delivers an attack potency of 200, but it can only be used when the target's health is below 20%. It can also heal you for up to 20% of your maximum HP if it kills the target. This skill sits on a 90-second cooldown. Now, having this extra damage skill that can be used between your global cooldowns is super important and can help you finish off fights a lot quicker. The only other Marauder skills I would suggest you getting is Foresight, which increases your defense by 20% for 20 seconds, and Bloodbath, which is a buff that converts 25% of all physical damage dealt into HP for 15 seconds. To get all the mandatory skills for Monk, you will need Marauder at 26 and Lancer to 34. Now, other than Blood for Blood, the only other offensive cooldown the monk has is Internal Release, which should be used together with Blood for Blood and generally is used at the beginning of a fight. As for defensive cooldowns, the monk has Featherfoot, which increases your evasion by 25%. This isn't a terrible skill, but in dungeons and raids, it's rarely used and mostly sees its use during solo content or if you accidentally pull aggro. The monk also has one of the best group defensive cooldowns in the entire game, which is called Mantra. This skill increases your HP recovery via curing magic by 20% for yourself and nearby party members for 15 seconds. This skill is amazing, especially in those situations where you know you'll be taking large raid-wide AoE damage, such as Titan Stomps or at the end of turn 4 in the Binding Cold Bahamut. And the last offensive cooldown the monk has is a self-heal called Second Wind. This is an instant cast ability that has a cure potency of 650. I generally see it cure for between 800 and 1100 health at max level. Now the last thing I want to talk about is stat priorities for the monk. As a monk, it goes strength, accuracy until 480, skill speed, critical hit rate, then determination. Now the reason you only need 480 accuracy is because if you have anything less, you'll miss attacks in turn 5 of the Binding Cold Bahamut. And if you've ever been there, you know those couple of missed attacks could mean the difference between a win and a loss. Anyways guys, that's all I have when it comes to the monk. Please feel free to like, favorite, subscribe, and share for more Final Fantasy content. And don't forget to follow me on Facebook and Twitter where I post upcoming content and also answer all of your Final Fantasy XIV questions. Thanks again guys, and as always, I'll see you next time.